in the late 19th century. Africa was not discovered. It was divided, not by its people, not by its cultures, but by distant powers seated in European halls drawing borders with ink. And ambition, lines that ignored languages, ignored histories, ignored humanity. Africa became a prize, a resource, a map of extraction. Now, fast forward, more than a century later, no empires are formally declaring control. No foreign flags are being planted on African soil. And yet, something is unfolding. A railway slices through the Kenyan savannah, precise, modern, undeniable. At the coast of Mombasa, cranes rise like giants lifting cargo into a global system of trade. Across the continent, highways stretch, ports expand, and cities transform. Billions of dollars move quietly, strategically, consistently. And at the center of it all, China. But beneath the steel, the concrete, and the promise of progress, a deeper question lingers. Is this Africa rising, or is this control, reimagined, more subtle, more complex, more difficult to see? Because history, it does not always repeat itself in the same way. Sometimes it evolves. And what if everything we think we understand about China and Africa is only part of the story? To understand what is happening in Africa, we must first understand China, because this story does not begin in Africa. In 1978, China stood at a crossroads, a nation shaped by revolution, yet constrained by isolation. Its economy was fragile, its global influence limited. But then came a shift. Under Deng Xiaoping, China made a decision that would reshape the world: reform. Open, expand. Factories began to rise. Villages transformed into cities. Exports surged across continents. Within decades, hundreds of millions were lifted out of poverty. And China became the factory of the world. But growth created a new reality, a new hunger, not just for survival, but for expansion. Resources to fuel industries, markets to absorb production, partnerships to extend influence. And so, China looked outward, not toward Europe, not toward North America, but toward a continent long underestimated: Africa, a continent rich in natural resources, oil, minerals, land, a continent with the youngest population on Earth, a future workforce, a future market, but also a continent constrained. Infrastructure gaps measured not in millions, but in hundreds of billions of dollars. Roads that end where development should begin. Railways disconnected. Ports overwhelmed. To many global investors, this looked like risk. To China, this looked like opportunity. And so began a new narrative, not colonization, not aid, but partnership. Chinese officials spoke of mutual benefit. African leaders spoke of accelerated development. Deals were signed. Loans were approved. Projects were launched. No colonial armies. No overt political conditions. Just a promise: we will build what you need, and together we will grow. But every promise in history has always come with a question: at what cost? Then the transformation began. Not slowly, not cautiously, but at a scale the continent had rarely seen before. Railways, steel arteries cutting across landscapes once isolated for generations. In Kenya, the standard gauge railway connected Mombasa to Nairobi, reducing travel time, reshaping logistics, redefining trade. In Ethiopia, an electrified railway linked Addis Ababa to Djibouti's ports. A journey that once took days, now measured in hours. In Nigeria, rail modernization projects promise to reconnect cities, to revive movement, commerce, and national integration. Ports expanded. From Angola to Tanzania to Djibouti. Airports upgraded. Highways carved through remote regions. Cities began to breathe differently. But beneath the visible transformation, another layer was unfolding. Chinese companies entered Africa's resource sectors. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, cobalt, critical for modern batteries. In Sudan, oil, fueling global energy demands. In Guinea, bauxite, essential for aluminum production. This was not random. It was structured, strategic, integrated. Because China was not just building infrastructure, it was building access. Access to resources. Access to trade routes. Access to future markets. And then came the digital expansion. Telecommunications networks spread rapidly across the continent. Mobile connectivity increased. Smart systems emerged. Surveillance technologies. Data infrastructure. Digital ecosystems. China was no longer just shaping roads. It was shaping systems. And for many African nations, this was progress. Visible, tangible, immediate. But as the skyline changed, so did the conversation. Quiet at first, almost invisible, questions began to emerge. Who finances these projects? Really? Who owns them, ultimately? Who controls them in the long run? And perhaps the most important question of all, when the loans come due, what happens next? Because this is where the story changes. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but subtly. The same railways that symbolize progress also represent obligation. The same ports that enable trade also anchor debt. And history has taught us something important. Influence rarely arrives loudly. It embeds itself quietly in systems, in agreements, in dependencies. So the question is no longer just about infrastructure. It is about power. And in the next chapter, we begin to see the cost. Every road tells a story, not just of where it leads, but of what it costs to build. Across Africa, the transformation is undeniable. Railways run where silence once dominated. Ports handle volumes once unimaginable. Cities expand with a new sense of possibility. But beneath this progress, a quieter reality begins to surface. Debt. By the early 2020s, African nations owed China tens of billions of dollars. Loans structured across decades. Interest rates varying. Terms often complex. Sometimes opaque. For many governments, these loans were necessary. Traditional Western lenders institutions like the World Bank and IMF often came with conditions, governance reforms, austerity measures, policy restrictions. China offered something different. Speed, flexibility, execution. But flexibility can sometimes mean ambiguity. In Zambia, debt distress became more than an economic issue. It became a national crisis. Public services strained. Currency weakened. Negotiations intensified behind closed doors. And Zambia was not alone. Across the continent, several countries found themselves in similar positions, balancing development needs against growing financial obligations. Then, a phrase emerged. Controversial, powerful, divisive. Debt trap diplomacy. The claim was simple, that China lends aggressively, knowing that some countries may struggle to repay, and uses that vulnerability to gain strategic leverage. But reality is rarely that simple. Chinese officials strongly reject this narrative. They argue these are bilateral agreements, requested by sovereign governments, designed for mutual benefit. And there is truth in that. No country is forced to accept these loans. Many African leaders actively pursued them, seeking alternatives to traditional financing models. But critics raise another point, not about intent, but about outcome. What happens when repayment becomes difficult? What happens when negotiation power shifts? In Sri Lanka, far from Africa but often referenced, a major port was leased to a Chinese company after debt struggles. Could similar scenarios emerge in Africa? There is no single answer, only uncertainty. And beyond debt, another layer of tension begins to appear. Labor. On many Chinese-funded projects, local workers have raised concerns. Limited employment opportunities, wage disparities, cultural misunderstandings. In some cases, Chinese firms bring their own workforce, citing efficiency, expertise, and project timelines. To governments, this ensures delivery. To some local communities, it raises questions. Who truly benefits from these projects? Is infrastructure enough? If it does not fully integrate local economies. And yet, there is another side. Without Chinese financing and execution, many of these projects might not exist at all. No railway, no port expansion, no rapid transformation. So the dilemma deepens. Is Africa paying too much for development? Or finally accessing opportunities long denied? Analytical. At first glance, this is a story about economics, infrastructure, trade, investment. But step back, and a different picture emerges. This is about power. China's global strategy, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative, is not just about building roads. It is about building influence. A network that stretches across continents, connecting Asia, Europe, Africa, creating pathways not just for goods, but for geopolitical reach. Africa plays a critical role in this vision. Its geographic position linking major shipping routes, its resources fueling global industries, its population representing future markets. In this context, every port becomes strategic, every railway becomes political, every loan becomes a relationship, and relationships shape influence. Unlike traditional Western engagement, China's approach is different. No overt political conditions, no public demands for governance reform, just agreements, deals, infrastructure delivered often faster than expected. To many African leaders, this is refreshing, pragmatic, respectful of sovereignty. But to some analysts, it raises a deeper concern, because influence does not always announce itself. It builds gradually, through dependency, through integration, through necessity. When a country relies on a partner for infrastructure, for financing, for technology, the balance of power begins to shift, not visibly, but structurally. And this is where history begins to whisper again. External powers shaping Africa's future is not new. In the colonial era, railways were built, but not for African mobility. For extraction, resources moved outward, wealth flowed elsewhere. Infrastructure served external interests. Later, during the Cold War, Africa became a stage. Global powers competed for influence through aid, alliances, and ideology. Now, a new era has emerged. China's presence is not colonial in the traditional sense. There are no governors, no imposed political systems, and yet patterns invite comparison. Strategic investments in key sectors, long-term economic ties, growing political influence. But there is a critical difference. Africa today is not the Africa of the past. Governments negotiate. Leaders choose partners. Policies are shaped internally, at least in principle, which raises a crucial question. Is this history repeating itself, or history being rewritten? Because modern influence does not require control over land. It requires control over systems, trade systems, financial systems, digital systems, and perhaps most importantly, decision-making systems. As China's presence expands, so does global attention. Western nations begin to respond. New initiatives, new partnerships, renewed interest in Africa. Suddenly, Africa is no longer overlooked. It is contested, not through war, but through investment, through influence, through strategy, and Africa stands at the center of it all. But here's the paradox. More attention means more opportunity, but also more pressure, because every partnership comes with expectations, every deal with implications, and the choices made today will shape the continent for generations. So the question evolves. This is no longer just about China. It is about Africa's position in a changing world. Will it leverage competing powers to its advantage, or will it become entangled in a new web of dependency? The answer is still unfolding. For much of history, Africa has been spoken about, analyzed, interpreted, defined by others. But this story cannot be told without Africa's own voice. Across the continent, perspectives on China are not uniform. They are layered, complex, sometimes contradictory. In government offices, some leaders see China as a long-awaited partner, a nation that delivers, not in theory, but in concrete. Roads that exist, railways that function, infrastructure that can be touched, used, measured. They argue, for decades development was promised. Now it is being built. And for them, the equation is simple. No country develops without infrastructure. No infrastructure without financing. And China provides both. But beyond government halls, the conversation shifts. In universities, among economists and policy analysts, questions deepen. What are the long-term implications of these agreements? Are contracts transparent enough? Are risks fully understood at the time of signing? Some warn of structural dependency, not immediate, but gradual. A slow alignment of economic systems that may limit future autonomy. Then, at the level of everyday life, the story becomes even more personal. A trader in Nairobi sees opportunity. Faster transport means cheaper goods. Cheaper goods mean more customers. A construction worker in Lagos sees employment. Projects create jobs, however temporary. Income flows, however limited. But a community displaced by infrastructure expansion sees something else. Loss, disruption, uncertainty, and in these lived experiences, the reality of China in Africa becomes clear. It is not one story, it is many. For some, it is progress. For others, it is pressure. For most, it is both. And this raises a deeper, more uncomfortable question. Is Africa being shaped by China? Or is Africa actively shaping the relationship? Because agency is not just about choice. It is about power within that choice. To understand the full picture, we must look at outcomes, not in theory, but in practice. In Ethiopia, the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway transformed logistics. Trade accelerated. Connectivity improved. Economic zones began to emerge, a case often cited as success. In Kenya, the standard gauge railway reduced travel time significantly. Modern, efficient, symbolic. But questions remain. Revenue challenges, operational sustainability, long-term financial viability. In Zambia, debt distress forced difficult national decisions. Restructuring, negotiation, adjustment. A reminder that infrastructure alone does not guarantee stability. In Angola, oil-backed loans enabled post-war reconstruction. Cities rebuilt, systems restored, but tied closely to commodity dependency. And across the continent, telecommunications networks expanded rapidly. Connectivity increased. Digital inclusion improved. Yet concerns about data control and technological dependence continue to grow. These are not contradictions. They are realities. Because development is never linear, it is uneven, complex, context-dependent, and so the narrative resists simplicity. China in Africa is not a singular outcome. It is a spectrum, from success to strain to something in between. There is a tendency to frame this story in extremes. Either Africa is being exploited, or Africa is benefiting. But what if both perspectives are incomplete? Because in today's world, relationships are rarely one-directional. China needs Africa for resources, for markets, for geopolitical positioning, and Africa needs partners for capital, for infrastructure, for accelerated development. This is not colonialism in its classic form, but neither is it a perfectly equal partnership. It is something more complex, interdependence, with asymmetry. And within that asymmetry lies the real challenge. How does Africa maximize benefit while minimizing vulnerability? How does it negotiate from strength in a system where power is uneven? How does it ensure that development today does not become dependency tomorrow? These are not questions for China alone. They are questions for African leadership, African institutions, African strategy, because ultimately, the future of Africa cannot be outsourced. So we return to the question we began with. Is China in Africa an investment or a modern form of colonization? The answer is neither simple nor singular. It is not colonization in the traditional sense. There are no flags raised over territories, no direct political control imposed. But neither is it a neutral transaction. It is influence, structured, strategic, expanding. It is development, accelerated by external capital. It is opportunity, shaped by unequal power dynamics. And perhaps most importantly, it is a relationship still in motion, because the outcome has not yet been decided. Not in Beijing, not in Washington, but in African capitals, in policy rooms, in negotiation tables, in decisions being made right now. History will remember this moment, not just for what was built, but for what it became. Will these railways connect prosperity or dependency? Will these ports anchor growth or obligation? Will this partnership empower Africa or entangle it? The answer will not come from outside. It will come from within. From how Africa negotiates, from how it governs, from how it defines its own priorities. Because in the end, this is not just a story about China. It is a story about Africa's future. And the most important question is not what is China doing in Africa, but rather, what is Africa choosing to become? Because that question, Nadi, is no longer about the past. It is unfolding right now. Right now, as you are watching this, a cargo ship is docking somewhere along Africa's coastline. Containers stacked high, labeled, coded, tracked, move seamlessly from sea to land. Cranes lift, systems respond, data flows. Thousands of miles away, decisions have already been made. Financing approved, contracts signed, routes optimized. In Nairobi, a train departs on schedule. In Lagos, digital payments move across networks built on foreign technology. In Zambia, negotiations over debt quietly reshape national priorities. And behind all of this, not visible and invisible at the same time, is China. But here is the paradox. Africa today is more connected than ever before, more financed, more globally integrated, and yet more dependent or more empowered. Because what we are witnessing is not just development. It is direction. It is alignment. It is choice. And that choice, where will define everything. Because in the end, the future of Africa will not be determined by presence alone, negli nexti, but by power over decisions. Because what we are witnessing now is not just development, it is alignment. And the real question is no longer about the past, it is about the present, and what the present is becoming. China is no longer an emerging power, it is a global force, from manufacturing to technology, from finance to infrastructure. China has positioned itself at the center of global economic transformation, and Africa has become one of its most important frontiers. But this is not the Africa of 20 years ago. Urban populations are rising rapidly. Digital adoption is accelerating. A middle class is emerging. The continent is not just resource-rich anymore. It is market-rich, future-rich. And China's promise has evolved. It is no longer just, we will build your roads. It is now, we will integrate your economies into the global system. Infrastructure still matters. Railways, ports, energy systems. But now, layered on top of that, digital ecosystems, e-commerce platforms, fintech infrastructure, smart city technologies. China is not just building the physical Africa, it is participating in building the digital Africa. And for many governments, this is exactly what is needed. Speed, scale, execution. But beneath the promise, a deeper question begins to emerge. Who controls the systems being built? The expansion is no longer confined to roads and railways. It has entered every critical layer of modern society. Start with infrastructure. Across East and West Africa, rail lines continue to expand, connecting cities, ports, and industrial zones. Ports from Djibouti to Lekki are being upgraded into global trade hubs. Energy projects, hydropower, solar, transmission lines are addressing long-standing electricity deficits. But now, look closer. Mining. China remains deeply embedded in Africa's extractive industries. Cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, essential for electric vehicles. Lithium exploration in Zimbabwe. Copper in Zambia. These are not just resources. They are the building blocks of the global green transition. And then, telecommunications. Across Africa, a significant portion of digital infrastructure, NIC from mobile networks to fiber optics. NIC is built or supported by Chinese firms. This means something profound. Data flows, information flows, control becomes less visible. And then, finance. Chinese lending has shifted. Less aggressive than before, more cautious, more strategic. But still present, still influential, and increasingly tied to broader economic relationships. Trade volumes remain massive. China continues to be Africa's largest trading partner. Goods flow in both directions. But not equally. Africa exports raw materials. China exports finished products. A pattern that feels familiar. And this is where the tension begins to sharpen. The conversation today is no longer theoretical. It is practical, immediate. Debt is no longer a future concern. It is a current negotiation. Countries like Zambia have already restructured debt. Others, quietly, are renegotiating terms. China itself has adjusted its approach, offering extensions, participating in restructuring frameworks, balancing diplomacy with financial interests. This is no longer expansion at all costs. It is management of influence. But concerns remain. Transparency. Many agreements are not fully public. Terms are not always widely understood. Sovereignty. When critical infrastructure is tied to external financing, policy decisions can become constrained. Labor. In some regions, local participation remains limited. Technology. Who owns the data? Who controls the systems? And perhaps the most subtle cost of all, alignment. When economies become deeply integrated, choices become less independent. But here is the counter. Without China, would Africa have developed this fast? Would these projects exist? Would these systems be built? For many, the answer is no, which makes the dilemma even sharper. Is Africa navigating risk or entering dependency? The world is watching, because China is not the only player anymore. The United States has re-engaged. Europe has launched new investment initiatives. India, Turkey, the Gulf states, all expanding their presence across Africa. Suddenly, Africa is not just a partner, it is a priority. And this changes everything, because competition creates options. But it also creates pressure. Each power offers something different. Financing, security, technology, trade access, and Africa must navigate all of it. But China retains a unique advantage. It was early. It built relationships. It delivered infrastructure at scale. And in geopolitics, timing matters. But here's the deeper layer. This is not just about Africa. This is about the future of global order. Who builds the infrastructure often shapes the rules. Who finances development often influences decisions. Who provides technology often defines systems. And in this sense, Africa is not just a participant. It is a battleground of influence, not through war, but through integration. But Africa is not standing still. Across the continent, leaders are learning, adapting, renegotiating. There is growing awareness of risk, greater emphasis on transparency, stronger efforts to diversify partnerships. Some countries are becoming more strategic, negotiating better terms, balancing multiple global partners. Others still struggle. Limited leverage, high dependency, urgent development needs, and among citizens, the perspectives remain mixed. For some, China represents opportunity, infrastructure, jobs, connectivity. For others, it represents caution, debt, influence, uncertainty. But increasingly, a new mindset is emerging, not rejection, not blind acceptance, but negotiation. Africa is beginning to ask not just, what can China offer, but what terms do we accept? And that shift may define everything. So here we are, not in the past, not in speculation, but in the present. A continent rising, a global power expanding, a relationship deepening. Is this transformation? Yes. Is this influence? Also yes. Is this colonization? Not in the way history remembers it, but is it power? Without question. And perhaps that is the real answer. This is not a story of good or bad, not investment or colonization. It is a story of power meeting opportunity, of ambition meeting necessity, of a continent deciding its place in a changing world. And the outcome? It is not fixed, not predetermined. It is being shaped right now by decisions, negotiations, and choices. So the final question is not, what is China doing in Africa? But rather, what is Africa doing with China? Because the future, strategy, will not be defined by presence, not by who builds the roads, not by who finances the ports, not even by who installs the systems. It will be defined by control. Control over decisions, control over systems, control over direction. And that, DCTM, is where the story truly begins. Imagine this. A decade from now, an electric vehicle rolls off an assembly line somewhere in Africa, powered by cobalt mined in Congo, processed in a Chinese-owned facility, and financed through a multinational development partnership. The software running it? Built on infrastructure laid years earlier. The data it generates? Stored somewhere else. And in that single moment, nudges lies the entire question. Who built the future? And more importantly, who controls it? Because what we are witnessing today is not just development. It is design. And the choices being made now, quietly, strategically, incrementally, are shaping a system, not cohambrisho, that Africa will live within for generations. So this is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a realization that Africa's future will not be determined by who arrives, but by who decides. And that is a story still unfolding. Across the continent, smart cities emerge, traffic flows guided by algorithms, energy grids optimized in real time, digital currencies replacing cash, and somewhere in the background, decisions are being made, quietly, strategically. But here's the unsettling question. Who designed the system Africa is growing into? And more importantly, who will control it? Because the future is not something that arrives. It is something that is built. And right now, that construction has already begun. China's rise is no longer a story of catching up. It is a story of shaping what comes next, from artificial intelligence, to green energy, to global supply chains. China is positioning itself not just as a participant in the future, but as an architect of it. And Africa is central to that vision. Why? Because Africa represents something no other region does. A rapidly growing population, a digital leapfrogging opportunity, a continent still building its foundational systems. In many ways, Africa is not just developing, it is defining its first fully modern economic structure. And China's promise has evolved once again. No longer just, we will build your infrastructure. Now it is, we will help shape your future economy. Through industrial parks, through technology transfer, real or perceived, through long-term strategic partnerships. Green energy projects promise sustainability. Digital platforms promise inclusion. Financial systems promise access. And for many, this feels like a turning point, a chance to bypass old limitations, to accelerate into the future. But beneath that promise, a deeper question forms. Is Africa building its own future, or inheriting someone else's design? The next phase of expansion is not just physical, it is systemic. Start with energy. China is heavily investing in renewable energy across Africa. Solar farms, hydropower, battery storage systems. This is not just about electricity. It is about powering industries of the future. Then manufacturing. Special economic zones, way often supported by Chinese investment, are emerging across countries like Ethiopia and Nigeria. Factories are shifting. Supply chains are diversifying. Africa is being positioned as the next global manufacturing hub. But manufacturing is only part of the story. The real transformation is digital. E-commerce platforms are expanding. Mobile payment systems are evolving. Artificial intelligence applications are emerging. And behind much of this infrastructure are Chinese technologies, from cloud computing to surveillance systems to telecommunications networks. The future economy is being wired. But here's where the tension begins to surface. If the infrastructure of the future is built externally, then who governs it internally? And what happens when control over systems becomes more important than control over land? The risks of the future are often invisible in the present. Debt is evolving. It is no longer just about repayment. It is about sustainability. Can future economies generate enough value to justify today's investments? If not, what adjustments will be required? And at what cost? Then comes technology. Data is the new resource, not oil, not minerals. Data. Who owns it? Who accesses it? Who benefits from it? If Africa's digital infrastructure is externally built, does that create a new form of dependency? Or is it simply the cost of entering the global system? And then, there is sovereignty. Not territorial sovereignty, but digital sovereignty, economic sovereignty, strategic sovereignty. In a deeply interconnected world, these boundaries blur. And perhaps the most subtle risk of all is normalization. When dependency feels like partnership, when influence feels like cooperation, when control feels like integration. How do you recognize it? This is no longer just about China and Africa. This is about the future of global power. The 21st century will not be defined by territory. It will be defined by networks. Trade networks, digital networks, financial networks, and China understands this. The Belt and Road Initiative is evolving. Not just roads and ports, but digital Silk Roads, green Silk Roads, financial corridors, and Africa sits at the intersection of all of them. But China is not alone. The United States is investing in digital infrastructure. Europe is promoting sustainable development partnerships. India, the Gulf states, and others are expanding their influence. Africa is no longer peripheral. It is central. And this creates a new dynamic. Competition. But competition brings both opportunity and complexity. Because every partner has an agenda. Every investment has a strategy. And Africa must navigate all of it. Not as a passive recipient, but as a strategic actor. Because in the future, alignment will matter more than assistance. Across Africa, something is changing. A shift in mindset, from acceptance to negotiation, from dependency to strategy. Governments are becoming more cautious, more selective, more aware of long-term implications. Policies are evolving. Local content requirements, technology transfer clauses, debt management frameworks, and among a new generation of African leaders and thinkers. A different question is emerging. Not who will invest in Africa, but Costa Stratum. How should Africa engage the world? Entrepreneurs are building local solutions. Tech ecosystems are growing. Innovation hubs are emerging. Africa is not just receiving the future. It is beginning to create it. But challenges remain. Institutional capacity, governance, negotiation power. Because agency is not just about intention. It is about execution. And the future will test that. So we return, one final time, to the question, is China and Africa a pathway to transformation? Or a new form of colonization? The future does not offer a clear answer. Because it is not one outcome. It is a negotiation between power and possibility, between influence and independence, between ambition and caution. China will continue to invest. Africa will continue to develop. But the nature of that relationship will depend on choices made today. Because the future is not controlled by who builds it. It is controlled by who governs it. And that distinction changes everything. So perhaps the real question is not quite, will China shape Africa's future? But, Saji Enansem Medotization, will Africa shape the terms on which that future is built? Because in the end, the most powerful form of control is not ownership. It is influence over decisions. And the future of Africa will be defined not by what is given, but by what is negotiated. And that story has only just begun.